Well, we welcome you back into the crowded booth as we take a recruiting update fresh off the official visit season. My name is Bryce Kuhn, and alongside me, if you're watching on our YouTube channel, if you're listening on those podcast platforms, it's Christian Clemente of Auburn Undercover. They're the 24/7 Sports Network. Christian, we've had Nathan on. We've never had you on, man. So I know this is quite a time to get you on the podcast and talk about Auburn recruiting, man. But we're glad to have you.
What recruiting? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Auburn fans, do not get mad. I know it's a rough time, but things will get better, and we'll talk about that. But thanks for having me on, Bryce. Appreciate it. You're always my guy, so I'm happy to hop on.
Well, Christian, I guess, we could start so many different places with this, but obviously, I guess what's hitting the news cycle as we record this on Monday, some decommitments, and for fans watching the ranking kind of go lower and lower down the SEC rankings, and obviously 24/7 composite, wherever you're looking at your different rankings. I guess what is kind of your reaction to some of the recent decommitments, and where's the worry meter in terms of if you're an Auburn fan looking at this, how worried are you?
Yeah, they hurt. I mean, there's no excuses for it. The Jermichael Garrett one, that was more of a mutual parting of ways. Auburn had kind of wrapped up that recruitment. That one was done about a month or so before he even publicly decommitted. So that was one that was not. I don't count that in this.
Gotcha.
But the Shadarius Toodle and the Devin Carter, those hurt. There's no other way around it. I mean, Auburn really, really wanted Shadarius Toodle, and they felt like they had locked him down during that official visit, which was his final one of the summer. He had previously said that Georgia was his number one school, even though he was committed to Auburn, modern day recruiting now. And then he said Auburn was back in the top spot, and that lasted literally exactly a week, because a week later he flipped to Georgia on Sunday. And then Devin Carter flips obviously on Monday to Florida State. That one also hurts because his comments leaving the visit were very positive, said that Auburn was home, said that, despite visiting Florida State, he felt really good about where things stood still. So my takeaway from those two would be not to read too much into post-visit interview comments, which sucks because I'm trashing my own work at that point, but that's just kind of the way it goes.
Yeah.
In terms of the panic levels, it's really, really tough. For me, I'm not trying to sell hope, but I'm not overly concerned. Like, look, those are bad losses. Don't get me wrong. Those are bad recruiting losses. I'm not making excuses for that. But I'm just saying, so much of this recruiting class hinges on this season and what Auburn's able to do on the field, to where this staff, they still know how to recruit. They're still going after top guys in the country. And I think part of the reason they're struggling with a lot of them is you're recruiting against the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Georgias, all these schools that are competing in the playoff. Well, the past couple of years, you were able to beat some of those schools because you were the shiny new car. You were selling hope. You were selling the future. You were selling, look what we're going to become. Well, you get worse in year two. You go from 6-7 to 5-7, don't even make a bowl game. So now all these other schools are negatively recruiting you because that you earned it by losing. And now you're fighting that uphill battle for all these top guys. And for a lot of them, I think they want to see Auburn do it on the field this fall. I think Auburn is in it with a lot of these guys that they're getting flipped. They're losing out on, they're in the top 2, top 3, maybe stuff like that, which woo, runner-up trophy. But that stuff does kind of matter in June, kind of. Yeah. Because as we've seen, none of this really matters until December. It doesn't matter until, look, we're in commit. We just had summer official visit season. Now we're in commit season. Then we've got the season, and then it's flip season. We all know flip season is coming. It's probably going to be crazier than ever because of revenue sharing and NIL, which we can get into. I think that's another factor that's hurting Auburn a little bit right now. But I think flip season is going to be crazy. And if Auburn gets 8 wins, strings together 9 wins, they'll put together a good class. They've proven that. If they can't get those wins, that's a totally different conversation for where things are headed.
Let's dive right into it. Perfect segue, Christian. You've done podcasts before, obviously, but revenue sharing, and I've talked with people know that between the show that I cover LSU with people inside that building about how they're going to handle it, all the way down to the G5 level. We've had talks with coaches. What's Auburn's plan, and is that what's the correlation between maybe the lackluster recruiting class currently and losing some guys, and kind of this whole revenue sharing and kind of understanding where your financials are going to come from here in the next month or so?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different facets to it. For one, look, you obviously there's the NIL aspect is still there, and what comes of that, with the whole approving deals over $600, I feel like that's not really going to hold up. I feel like as soon as a deal gets denied, it'll turn into a lawsuit, and then
Yeah.
that'll end. But point being, that's where it's at right now. So a lot of the money in recruiting at this point is all kind of revenue sharing.
Hmm.
Well, Auburn's roster has a lot of that money tied up already. You look at the current roster, you look at these young guys, they just lost Devin Carter, but in the receiver room, you have a salary cap. You only have so much money. You've got a lot of money tied up in Cam Coleman, Eric Singleton, Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons, Sam Turner, all those guys. You've got, and all of those guys can be back next year, including Eric Singleton. The
Yeah.
only guy that can't be back for 2026 is Horatio Fields. So you could theoretically bring back almost your entire wide receiver room going into the next year. So with that said, how much money are you going to put into wide receiver recruiting for next year? Same goes for quarterback. We've talked about Landon Duckworth, and after Auburn lost out on Travis Burgess, if Ashton Daniels redshirts, all three of Auburn's quarterbacks could come back next year. Now, I don't think the expectation is that Ashton will redshirt. He'll probably move on, but point being, you're kind of expecting right now Jackson Arnold and Deuce Knight to be back next year.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money tied up into two quarterbacks. Let's just call it what it is. Those guys were not cheap. I love being able to say that now, by the
Oh,
way.
it's so
Side
nice.
note, it makes it so much easier.
Yes.
But so you have to look at it. You have to look at positions. You have to look at next year's roster, which is so hard to do with the portal, but you have to look at where is your money tied up? What will it cost to bring those guys potentially back next year? Do you want to keep, how are you going to stack a position group? You're going to sign guys at every position group every year, obviously.
Mhm.
But how are you going to kind of stagger it a little bit? I think that's a question. I think Auburn has been very, very careful in how they've operated through revenue sharing and NIL so far, headed into July 1st, which I don't think has necessarily done them any favors on the recruiting trail. I think they've been really hesitant to throw out numbers. I mean, we even asked some recruits on the record, Devin Carter included, Sedarian Morgan, Braylon Womack. And Womack said he doesn't sit in any of those meetings at all, but Sedarian and Devin Carter said they're not throwing out numbers. They're not really giving concrete numbers, and that they will closer to December. So I think that's hurting Auburn right now.
Mm.
I think some other schools are throwing out numbers. I think some of them were legit. I don't know if some of the other ones are legit.
Yeah.
And we'll see if those stick. We'll see if those hurt other schools. We'll see if this is a good long-term play for Auburn, or what's going to happen. I don't have the answer for everyone there. I don't know exactly how it's going to go, but I think that's a couple things with NIL and revenue sharing.
I like what you brought up in terms of looking at positions that you are going to have to maybe, we'll use the word, not just at least hit the status quo again in terms of what you're going in financially, but reinvest into some of those guys. If guys see an upward tick in production next year, especially that wide receiver spot, and what we described was essentially an NFL roster. You have those guys on the books. You got to kind of know how you can work out your rookie contracts and your rookie deals in terms of recruiting and everything like that. I guess the last piece we hit on here, and you mentioned this fall, is it too much to say this is the most important season for Hugh Freeze? Because look, I was there a couple of years ago in Nashville at SEC Media Days. You were too, and he really kind of hit the home the fact that the roster wasn't where it needed to be yet, and I think a lot of people understood that. And I'll say it so you don't, the disaster that had happened in the tenure before in terms of roster building and roster management.
I'd be willing to say that.
You can say that. I was gonna shield you, but I've seen you on social media, so you're all right. in terms of that, like this year, not just in terms of keeping his job, which we all know Hugh Freeze is not a secret, could be on the hot seat, might be on the hot seat here in 2025, but for recruiting purposes, to get some of those flips in December, what type of season does Auburn have to have? And as you've talked with recruits who maybe the shine has kind of worn off of the new fancy car, what do they want to see? What are some of the specific things they need to see in order to make Auburn their home?
Yeah, it's kind of funny to hit on that second part first. Auburn went 5-7 last year and signed a top 10 class still. A lot of these guys saw a lot of things that they liked out of a 5-7 team.
Hmm.
They saw an offense that, despite a lot of struggles, racked up some pretty decent stats. You look at, yardage marks and stuff like that across the country, honestly pretty good,
Mhm.
given how bad it was at times.
Yeah.
Defensively, a lot of young guys out there, but the defense was really productive. I feel like they've seen a lot of what they've wanted to see. They've seen young guys out there playing a lot of that because Auburn had to, but I feel like they've seen what they wanted to see. It all needs to just kind of string together at this point. It all needs to come together. There have been errors from coaching to playing to fundamentals to all kinds of stuff that's led to this, to the point where it just needs to everything needs to come together perfectly, which is way easier said than done.
Yeah.
And what perfectly is, for a lot of people, perfectly would be competing for the SEC and competing to make the playoff. I don't think Auburn is at that point this year, but I think if they can show the next step of progression just a little bit more. 8-4, a lot of fans might cringe at that a little bit and saying that would be a good season, but I do legitimately think that would be a pretty good season for Auburn this year. The
Mhm.
schedule is about as doable as you could get from an Auburn schedule. I mean, it's tough. It's front loaded, starting at
Yeah.
Baylor, and then your first two SEC games are at Oklahoma, at A&M. Then you have a bye week, and then you host Georgia. That's a very front loaded schedule. It's not easy, but if Auburn can get through that, there's some winnable games at the end. The Iron Bowl is right before signing day. If you can steal one of the Iron Bowl or the Georgia game, that helps you a lot, especially in recruiting as well. So I feel like it's lined up there. And then, kind of hitting on that in your first question as well, how important it is. Look, I don't know if I would say Hugh Freeze is necessarily on the hot seat this year, but he might be on the warm seat a little bit, might be getting a tiny bit
Mhm.
toasty. Um, I think if he got 7 wins, he would probably be okay. But if he got 7 wins, what is the recruiting class going to look like? What is the lead up going into 2026 going to look like? It's probably not going to be great, to be honest. And if he gets less than 6 win or less than 7 wins, that's a totally different conversation. And then we definitely are talking about the hot seat. But if you
Yeah.
can get 8 wins, I think you can put together. We saw it with Florida last year. Florida
Yeah.
was down in the dumps last summer. I mean, they had one commitment in their class. It was a disaster. Auburn kind of trending towards that point right
Mm.
now. Rough couple first years for Billy Napier. Bad summer of recruiting. Just couldn't really get anything going on the trail. And I still think Auburn can get some guys, but if Auburn can string together some wins like Florida did last fall, they put together, I think, a top 15 class. I think Auburn can easily do that, and things can go pretty well towards the end. But it all depends on, can things click on the field, which they haven't so far. So we'll see if things can change this year.
Last one for you, man. We'll get you out of here. Obviously, some news hitting the kind of the headlines today for me and for you, as Auburn kind of still in the race for a 2026 quarterback, still looking. LSU, obviously one of those as well after missing out on Bo Bentley. You mentioned Landon Duckworth, Bryson Beaver, a guy that Auburn offered today. LSU also offered. What's the status of the quarterback kind of recruiting right now for Auburn as they head in to this dead period and get ready for fall camp? You mentioned they've got a lot of money tied up between Arnold and Knight. What does it look like to you, and what could fans expect realistically?
Yeah, well, it's kind of taken a turn ever since they missed out on Travis Burgess. North
Mhm.
Carolina kind of made a surge, and I think they made an offer that Auburn was not fully comfortable reaching for Burgess, and so he committed to North Carolina. And look, he had a great week out at Elite 11. That's a guy that I think
Yeah.
really really highly of, the Grayson quarterback. So good for him, great kid. You saw from that point, it was like, okay, well, where does Auburn go from here? Because they've kind of focused mostly on, look, they really liked Burgess, but viewed him as a little bit more of a developmental guy, a little bit more of a, I hate to say this because this is going to sound negative, a cheap option.
Yeah.
But look, he's just not ranked as highly as some other guys.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of the matter of the fact. So it was really surprising after they missed out on Burgess. They were still involved with Landon Duckworth at that point, but they kind of turned the heat up on him. They brought him back for another visit after his official visit. He spent the weekend on campus. Um, but I don't think Auburn is quite there with how South Carolina is invested in that recruitment, both financially and just how hard they've recruited him over the past, years at this point. He was committed there previously.
Mhm.
So now, especially with the new offer that went out on Monday, feels like kind of circling around again, seeing if there's some other, quote unquote discount quarterbacks out there. But it seems like didn't get to see any of his throws, but it seems like Bryson Beaver had a great week out at Elite 11.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much of a discount guy he'll end up being in the long haul, but they're circling around, seeing if there's some other guys out there. And I think the offer that went out to Beaver isn't necessarily a complete indication of them not feeling great about Duckworth, but you can kind of do the math on that one, and you can kind of, I think people can figure it out that Duckworth returns to South Carolina for a weekend visit. Auburn wasn't feeling super great going into that anyway, and then the new offer goes out. So
got to read between the lines. That's what we have to do in the recruiting game. Christian Clemente, Auburn Undercover, does great work over there on the 24/7 Sports Network. Before we get you out of here, man, let people know where they can find your work and y'all's team with what y'all have going on over there.
Yeah, all at auburnundercover.com. Great team with myself and Nathan and Jason and Philip. It's a fun mix of characters over there. And then I'm on Twitter at @CClemente247.
We'll have to get you back on, man, before the season starts as
Yeah.
we wrap up. Obviously, recruiting there as well. But, Christian, we appreciate the time, man. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you check out their work, Auburn fans. And I didn't plan it this way, Christian, but Travis Burgess is going to be on the show later this week. So we're going to be talking with him later.
Hey, I love Travis. Great kid. He will be a great guest.
And like you said, man, he really balled out and showed some really big things out there.
I'm happy for him. He had a great week out in California.
We'll see what happens. Christian Clemente, my name is Bryce. We appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe on all those platforms, and we'll catch you next time here on the Crowded Booth.